Tech Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
Thank you very much. I'm one that would be happy to have your attention, but as an entrepreneur, the first rule is always be selling. So I'd like you to not pay attention to me for a moment and make sure you iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, whatever, and please go download Taxi Magic and Sedan Magic. And after you do that, then we can listen. No, I'm actually very happy to be here. I'm glad that I was let in. I've been an entrepreneur for my whole life. I would say that I'm 2X at this point. I started my first company when I was 24, and for those of you who can do the math, I'm 2X 24 at this point. I was carted next door for a beer before this event, so there's something to look forward to. You can always stay young. Again, I'm here to talk about some of my experience in these years. I would say that even though I've been in business 24 years, they haven't been the same 24 years all along. My first company, I got started, there wasn't any public knowledge of the internet. I'm sure that it was around, but we were a couple of kids out of college who went to work at Accenture. We had an idea because we were out there working in the world for some software. So our biggest challenge back in 1988 was being young kids selling software to old guys who ran IBM mainframes. At that time, it wasn't so much the idea, it was how do you get in to talk to those folks. So the interesting thing we did then was just be really expert at the database technology we were working with, and so we would use that to get in the door and say, oh, by the way, while I'm consulting on your database, here's a product. So one little lesson from those days is that it wasn't so much about how different it is now. Part of our competitive advantage was actually the message and the way that we sold our product. So our software, when we got started, we thought it was the only thing anybody had ever thought of. By the end of the first year, there were 7 companies doing exactly what we were doing. So we needed to go to an execution play, and executing, we can update the old analogy of, let's say, 2 iOS developers out in the woods, and they come across a bear, and one guy says, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to get away from the bear? And the other guy says, hey, I don't have to get away from the bear, I just have to run faster than you. So essentially that's what selling and executing at my first company was about. We didn't, after the first 7, there was really only 2, us and a company called Brownstone, and we used to say, hey, we don't have to be perfect, we don't have to be amazing, we just have to be better than Brownstone. And that was entrepreneurship, selling to enterprises. My next company, I was fortunate to sell that business right about my 30th birthday to a public company. I had a nice, what I called then a prosperity break. The internet came out, we looked around for stuff. I never really got excited about the pets.com and that sort of stuff, so I went back to my, what I know as enterprise software, and was asked to be CEO of a company, raised a bunch of money to do Telecom Software. And in that company, it was all about timing. After about a year and a half, most of you might remember the year 2000, it was a big days. We had an opportunity to sell the company for $100 million. The VCs at the time had only put in $3 million. And so our interests were not aligned. I, as a founder, or nearly co-founder, I was ready to sell and move on, but they wanted a big IPO and go on. So we stayed the course. We went and raised $20 more million. But the next year, the telecom crash hit. And so all of a sudden, that wasn't, while I think it was maybe my best work as an entrepreneur, going from that startup to that quick sale, it ended up not happening because of the timing in the market and where our investors were. So the next big thing that I want to talk about is RideCharge, and having a successful venture and having raised money and run companies. A lot of entrepreneurs ask me, well, I want to do that. How do I have this? And last week I was up at a conference in Niagara Falls, and I was overwhelmed. The water just keeps coming all day long, and you can't stop it. And that's really sort of what an entrepreneur is like, being an entrepreneur is like with ideas, is the ideas just keep coming, and you have to decide which ones are, really going to work, and what business model can I make. Something's very useful, but if you can't make money at it, it's a hobby. It's not a business. So when the idea came, my other advice for entrepreneurs is, how do you find that idea? Is just go out in business and get a job and do some work in an industry that you might like. And while you're out there in that industry, you're likely to find something worth starting a business over. And so that's sort of how RideCharge got started. My original business partner back when I was 24, he had just sold a company and was working in a public company that did expense reports. And they were automating expense reports. And the only thing that was left to sort of automate was taxi receipts. So we got started with RideCharge with the big idea of doing a trusted electronic credit card receipt for taxis. And that was interesting, and it was sort of an enterprise sale again. We're going out to these big businesses and saying, please tell all your employees to use, at the time it was just RideCharge, to book and pay for your taxis. But that was a long haul, and we were struggling. We were building good foundations. We were connecting into the taxi industry. But the thing that really changed it for us was technology, the advent of the iPhone. I mean, we were, to pay for the taxi, you actually called an 800 number and typed in how much you wanted to pay into the phone. It sort of makes me chuckle to think about how different it is today with our smartphones. So when the iPhone came out, everything changed for us, and we did, we were first dumb enough for the first 2 months of the iPhone to say, oh my gosh, that's not an enterprise tool, that's just a toy, forget about it. And then we're like, wait a minute, everybody's using these, we can make a better app. So pivoting, we added and created Taxi Magic. And when we created Taxi Magic, we said, hey, maybe the value isn't just in booking and paying with an electronic receipt, but it's actually just the booking and the tracking of the taxi and seeing it come to you and solving that messy logistics of getting a rider and a car and pulling it together. So we found a lot of value in that. But then the next thing is, well, how do we make a business model out of it? Because consumers, now all of a sudden we went from an enterprise play where we're helping with expense reports to a consumer play where we're helping the mass audience, go book and track a taxi. And mass audiences want things to be free. A friend of mine says, if you want to eat with the classes, you have to serve the masses. And clearly, taxi is a fairly ubiquitous thing. We have multi-millions of downloads. We're in 60-something cities nationwide. As was mentioned, we've been in the top of the App Store for almost 4 years now. So that was all great. People loved it, but how do you make a business model out of it? So we discovered that there's this thing in the taxi industry, which I like to call, I have 2 teenage daughters and a 2-year-old little boy, so I'm all confused at home. But my teenage daughters talk about frenemies, and in the taxi industry and in the transportation industry in general, the frenemy triangle is between the riders, drivers, and passengers. And much like a prostitution model, that triangle, the incentives aren't always aligned for all those parties. So what's interesting about Taxi Magic is we're able to sit on top of that and help drivers get more rides, help riders get more fares, get them on time. And so solving the business model, the frenemy triangle, was a key pivot in our life at RideCharge. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the iPhone and for that pivot. So a couple of other things to talk about. Once we pivoted and we got this cool app, some of the exciting things was this guy senior strategist from Google was testifying for the FCC early on about the mobile internet, and he says, hey, one of the best examples of what the mobile internet's going to be is this cool thing called Taxi Magic. It's my favorite app, and our Google alerts went all crazy, and we got, at minute 59, this is when the guy said it, we take out that clip. But the question is, how do you get your idea out there? There's thousands and thousands of apps in the App Store. How do you get noticed? And so how do you gain that momentum? So we did some pretty cool things in terms of co-marketing. We looked at the example of getting a taxi, and when you order a taxi, a lot of times if you call and just place an order, you don't hear anything ever again until the taxi arrives at your location. So there's a lot of uncertainty and doubt. So we partnered with the fleets and created something called a dispatch notification. So if you ordered your cab with a mobile phone, we would send you a text and say, hey, taxi number 35, driver named Matt, is picking you up. He's 1.2 miles away. And then we put in a little marketing message at the end that said, next time, book this cab with Taxi Magic, and put a little link in there. And things like that, being scrappy, being innovative, and finding other ways to get your marketing message out there is a key. So, if you're wondering, I have my fantastic crew. All of y'all wave your hand here. RideChargers in the office. In the audience. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Matt is helping me with my notes and is telling me to wrap it up and be ready for questions. The last thing I'll say about the momentum is being an entrepreneur, like that Niagara waterfall, is that the ideas keep coming, but the execution has to keep coming. You have to find new ways to get your product out there, new products. For example, we've just launched Sedan Magic in New York. We're launching Sedan Magic here in DC some point in the next few weeks. Hope you'll all try it out. We're still looking for early beta users. Come see us afterwards if you'd like to participate here in DC. But as I started off with my first company, we didn't have to be faster than the bear. You just had to be faster than your competition. Nowadays, I think in the consumer space, in the app world, you sort of have to be the bear. You have to be always moving, always attacking, listening. I say about Twitter, if we're not listening, you're losing. And we're very fortunate to have a very strong Twitter presence and people talking about us. When I've been on a long flight and I'm tired, I usually just go log into Twitter and search for Taxi Magic, and it'll pick me up. So that's a little bit about me. I would love to take some questions and see how I can share my experience.